For you I will. The city buzzed with the sound of cars zooming, horns honking and laughter. Music played in the distance. The stop light turned red, the signal to cross lit up. People hurried to cross the street before the light switched to green. Natalie was on her way to the office for another mundane day of crunching numbers and annoying coworkers. As she hurried, she bumped into a man. "Excuse me," he screeched as he took a double take. He knocked her purse to the ground. He paused, took a glance at the crosswalk light. There was exactly 9 seconds left before the light turned green. Paul picked up her purse, handed it to her and quickly ran to the opposite street corner. Natalie was in too much of a rush to pay any mind to Paul. As she quickly stepped onto the curb, Paul began to stretch his neck and stand on his tiptoes to see her before she had disappeared into the crowd. His heart began to beat faster at the very thought of her. She smelled marvelous, he thought to himself. Her eyes were beautiful and as big as the sun. He was eager to know who this mysterious woman was. He glanced down at his watch. I'm read 8:59 a.m. 8:59 a.m. he thought to himself. I should be back here in town at 8 a.m. just so I can see her again if I'm lucky. Paul walked briskly towards the sound of music playing. As he got closer, the louder the music became. "You are late, Paul," chided Ramon. "Yes. My apologies, I got tied up, but I'm just in time for my solo," Paul replied, smiling as he grabbed his bass guitar. While pulling the strap over his head, he began to think of his mysterious beauty again. His fingers clasped the top of the guitar and he began to play his solo, hitting every note with precision. He played his heart out as if he were playing for her. He looked up and in the distance of the crowd he saw her peering at him from a distance. He blinked and she mysteriously disappeared. He drew back to his spot in the group as his solo ended. The band played song after song until it was time for a break. 1 hour, shouted the band manager from across the stage. Everyone has a 1-hour lunch, he said again as he tapped his diamond-studded Rolex. Paul wandered to a nearby restaurant. He ordered his meal, waited and walked out. As he ate and walked, he decided to go back to where he bumped into Natalie. He stood at the corner waiting for the light to turn red. He thought to himself as he looked down the street of never-ending buildings. Where could she possibly be? Scratching his head, and taking a bite of his pita sandwich, he crossed the street. There was a conglomerate of financial buildings, legal firms among other things. He slowly walked past a building that had security sitting just inside the doorway. He noticed full-body scanners and armed guards with shoot guns. He shuddered a bit at the thought of someone being apprehended by those big bulky guys. He continued his walk. He noticed on both sides of the street were nothing but seemingly high-security buildings. Man, I might never find her again with all this. I'll probably need a badge or something to even walk up the steps. His chances of finding her again seemed futile. Paul glanced at his watch, finding he had 30 minutes left to get back on stage. He turned to walk back and there she was, walking out of a legal firm. He stood there stunned by her beauty, her hair being tousled by the wind. His heart began to beat harder as she approached him. The look on his face caused her to stop and ask, "Sir, are you well? Do you need assistance? Are you lost?" Her accent was of British accent, her voice was soft. He took a hard gulp before he said, "I need you," in a whisper under his breath. She smelled heavenly. Her hair was auburn, her makeup was flawless and heightened her natural beauty. She was slim and slender. She touched him on the arm. He peered down at her well-manicured hands. He froze, he could not get one word out. "Sir, are you all right?" She snapped her fingers in his ear. "Sir, do you need assistance?" He snapped out of it. He exclaimed, "I am perfectly fine, miss. Thank you." "Okay, great," she exclaimed as she began to walk off. He stopped her once more and gave her his business card. "If you are interested in jazz music, I play bass guitar with my band of friends. We are actually playing for the Wenches restaurant further downtown. If you have the time, come see us," he said nervously. She stood there for a moment and took in his features. He was strikingly handsome, muscular, well-dressed, clean-cut, standing at 6 feet 3 inches. She felt herself relax a bit in his presence. She imagined herself hugged up against him, the strength of his arms around her, his body warming hers on a cool winter evening. His eyes put her in a hypnotic state. She clinched her diamond necklace as she watched his lips move as he spoke. My good, he is one fine fella, she thought to herself. His voice was deep and of southern accent. She enjoyed that small moment in his presence as she had been waiting and wanting a man that is similar to his makeup. She glanced down at his hand as he held it out to give her his card. She took it slowly, imagining him kissing and holding her in the warmth of their home. She stood there in a daze for a moment, then snapped back. Sure. If I have the time I will. She walked off. He stood there and yelled, I do private sessions as well. Okay, thanks, she yelled as she continued to walk, waving her hand goodbye. He looked at his watch. He gasped. He had 9 minutes to get back on stage. He looked back and she disappeared again. Paul did not get her name. He ran back as fast as he could, thinking the whole time, I wish I knew her name. He arrived with 30 seconds to spare. He threw his sandwich down in his chair, grabbed his guitar and began to play while walking up on stage. The crowd cheered and hollered as he played impeccable notes that echoed through the city streets. After the concert ended, the band packed their instruments and took off. That night he couldn't focus on any of the band activities. Everything went in one ear and out the other. Yo man, you cool? Asked Matthew, a saxophone player from Montgomery, Alabama. Yeah man, I good, Paul replied. Okay, Matthew replied as he pat Paul on the shoulder and walked off, beer in hand. It was as if he floated through the night, tossing and turning, wondering and wishing. Days went by, he still hadn't heard from her. He began counting the days. He felt he would never see nor find another woman as soft and as beautiful as Natalie. He did something he never does. He took a knee before going out on stage and prayed with a tear in his eye. He prayed that if he ever got the chance to be with her, he would be everything she needed him to be. He stood up, wiped his face, took a shot of whiskey and walked out on stage. The lights were bright, the crowd cheered as he began to sing and play his guitar. His voice heavy with love and emotion. The crowd swayed as he sung and played. The nightclub was packed full of people. Cigar smoke filled the air. He sung his heart out. The lights went low and the crowd began to rage. They cheered, yelled, cried, hollered in emotion. Paul felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned and looked. It was her. She was there standing next to him, listening to the song he sung. She knew he wrote it for her. He continued to sing to her. As he got in one knee, he sang and played. Years fell from her eyes. When the song ended, he stood up and hugged her tight. She whispered in his ear, "My name is Natalie." He held her in tight and said, "I'll be everything you need me to be for you, Natalie." They kissed. The spotlight turned blue as the band played Softly Shining Bright on Paul and Natalie.